Everyone, and welcome to mindFly webinar series. Today, the topic of discussion is, when does fear set in? In this presentation, I'll be discussing the definition of fear, risk, and we'll see two aspects: the neurological, the limbic, and the psychological aspects. And then we'll discuss a few practical aviation related cases, solutions, and then come to a conclusion. So what is fear? Fear is a vital response to physical and emotional danger that has been pivotal throughout evolution. If people don't feel fear, they won't be able to protect themselves from legitimate threats, which often had life or death consequences in the ancestral world. Fear was basically inbuilt in our system to protect us from nature and from danger. There's the neurological or limbic definition, which deals with the chemical processes in the brain. It says that fear is an emotion of anticipation that is triggered when a situation that is at risk for our safety and for the safety of others is perceived. Through external stimuli or internal nervous system to prepare the body to face this danger, these stimuli can evoke freeze, flight, fight, or fright. So these emotions are generated from within the limbic system. So we discussed two aspects. Then we'll move over to risk. What is risk? And a study which was conducted to measure the perception and level of risk. So risk is defined as a chance of a given loss or injury. Risk gradients are graphical representations of risk. So we can have risk presented in the form of colors, like the weather radar, 3 different colors, the GPWS, or risk can be presented in form of numbers, which we perceive, or proxy risk. So we have to interpret those numbers and derive at a risk number. So risk gradient can be static, motionless, or dynamic, moving. Since risk itself is rather difficult to represent directly, it is typically represented indirectly by proxy. Some stimulus attribute, such as color, stance, inform more abstract quality of risk. A study was conducted wherein the subjects of the experiment were given a task: fly from A to B, the company policy to avoid all precipitation by 20 nautical miles. So if you see on the screen, you have 3 options. We have 3 cells, either to circumnavigate 20-mile clearance. Those who are a bit more adventurous, motivated, will go through 2 cells where there's a gap. Others who have a high risk appetite will go through 2 clouds without any gap. Now, what the study concluded was, pilots, like most people, vary in their stated level of risk tolerance. So not everybody is the same. There is a variance. This variance occurs because the society rewards the pilots for the courage, skewing mean upward, and perhaps creating inordinately high risk tolerance for those in castes its reverence upon. Generally, pilots are being considered by the society as those who know the job. We saw in the last webinar the Kigworth accident, wherein the pilot shut down the right engine, announced that he had shut down the right engine, but the passengers could notice fire on the left engine. Nobody spoke up because there was social distancing. Passengers assumed that the pilots know better. They know the job. So that is why they allowed them and undermined their situational awareness. Second, most pilots like most people, use risk heuristics. These are simplifying rules rather than complex mental calculations. Like everybody, 70% of the time we are in thinking mode. Rest of the time we apply our cognitive skills. But in thinking mode, we have certain heuristics, preset rules which we have decided and simply implement them. They may be right or wrong based on our experience. Not everybody has the same heuristics. Small number of these heuristics are clearly mistaken, unsafe, and need to be recognized and trained out. So regularly, if you train, then these can be identified and straightened up. The remaining majority is usually based on an intention of reasonable risk taking and safe yet efficient flying, and need to be tuned, make sure they accomplish these goals. So most of the people do not have a very high risk appetite. They tend to follow the rules, but operationally you tend to deviate and move away from the ideal training setting. So therefore, periodically you have to go back to training to reset to the mean. Emotions also need to be trained. There are certain pilots who are highly motivated, over motivated. They tend to take extra risk. So these highly motivated pilots need to be identified and again put back in training to ensure that they do not cross the line when it comes to risk under normal circumstances. If it is an abnormal situation and if it is justified, you can take certain degree of risk, but under normal circumstances, there is no need. The SOP does not allow you to take risks. The important thing in all these things, fear and risk, is to identify. Identification is through knowledge. If you have good knowledge, you have understanding of what's happening inside you, outside you, then the propensity of the risk reduces. In the human brain, we have three main elements: the thalamus, which is the grand relay station, wherein all the signals come and they are distributed. Then you have the cortex, which is in charge of executive function, that is perceiving and thinking. Third is the amygdala, which is in charge of emotional reaction, positive or negative. Now, the routing may change. It does not always follow thalamus, cortex, amygdala. Certain times it will go directly to the amygdala. So sensory information is received from the eyes, ears, touch, nose, passed into the thalamus, which decides where to send the stimulus, the sensory information, to the cortex. Cortex, it is processed, options generated, then sent to the amygdala, or it can go directly to the amygdala and thereafter evoke a response. Now, in which cases it goes to cortex, and when does it go to amygdala direct? Under normal circumstances, it will go to cortex, but in case of, for example, startle, wherein an immediate reaction is required, it goes direct to amygdala. Another example would be relating to the amygdala's association with emotions or past experiences. For example, if you walk around a bend, suddenly you see something on the floor, so you might be startled, you jump and prepare for flight. So you might think the thing on the ground looks like a snake. But after a while, when you've caught your breath, cortex comes back and starts generating options. The cortex says that what you saw had about something like frayed edges and not very long, wasn't moving. So then cortex generate options. It could be a rope. Then you see again, look at it again, it is a rope. But why did amygdala create that response? Because in the past you had some association, therefore it was recorded, memorized. So certain reactions are memorized and associations are memorized by amygdala. There is a syndrome wherein the person suffering from it loses memory and associations. So there was a girl who used to go for therapy to a doctor. There were nurses. But after that meeting, she would forget faces and names. Every time it would be a new association. So that was due to the syndrome she was suffering. The doctor one day tried an experiment. Before they shook hands, the doctor kept a needle within his fingers. And when they shook hands, put the needle out, and that poked her. She jumped with the reaction, pulled her, drew her hand back, and that basically was memorized by amygdala. Next time she came back, she never remembered the doctor's name, face. So she came back, held her hand out. Doctor also held his hand out. The moment doctor held his hand out, the association came back. She withdrew immediately. Why did she withdraw immediately? Because the moment the doctor held his hand out, amygdala kind of connected with the response and the emotions of the previous meeting. So even though cortex did not remember, amygdala remembered, and the response was generated. Fear. The cortex receives information from all lobes and put it together to allow us to respond to an integrated experience of the world. Frontal lobes are said to have executive functions, meaning that they are basically supervisory, and the brain processes occur there. The amygdala receives incoming messages from senses. It constantly scans your experiences and is at the ready to respond to any indication of danger. The amygdala is capable of reacting on the basis of its own emotional memories and doesn't need cortex-based memories. This is the London Blitz. London was bombed during the World War. And whenever these bombers used to approach, sirens would go off in London. People used to run to the bunkers, stay there till the sirens went off. But there were times when there were no bombers which came in, sirens still went. People hid inside the bunkers, but after some time, no bombs, people would get bored. Once they get bored, they would venture out. One person ventures out, others would follow. So that started happening. A Canadian psychologist called J.T. McCurdy observed this phenomena and came up with something very interesting. So what was known is it takes 1400 shells to kill a man. Probability is low. The sirens sound but no bombs, boredom set in. People became adventurous. And when the bomb exploded, the population was immediately divided into three groups. Those in the center of the bombing were obviously killed, unfortunately. Second, the near misses, nearabouts. So they had powerful reinforcement of the fear reaction. So the fear came in here because they experienced it. Shrapnel flying, buildings going down, people getting injured, they themselves getting injured. They would see people dying. So that reinforcement of fear happened. Third was remote misses. These people were in fact excited whenever the sirens went off because they were the remote periphery. Curiosity was generated, started questioning and speculation. It was the opposite reaction of those who developed fear. A study from the Civil Aeromedical Institute in Oklahoma correlates age versus accidents. On the left of the graph, till the age of about 30, the number of accidents are very high. Thereafter, they drop sharply till about 41, plateau, and then they start rising around 63. So what is the correlation here? There's another study which is based on the maturity of amygdala. So when you combine the two studies, then you can see the reasoning behind it. It says that several Morphological functional changes occur in the human brain during adolescence. Adolescents, they consider till 25, till the physical changes are happening in the amygdala. It is well established that the brain undergoes rewiring process and is not complete until approximately 25 years of age. A decrease in dopamine in the nucleus accumbens is involved in increased vulnerability to drug addiction and risky behavior. So it is not always risky behavior, but to a certain extent or percentage of population. Those uh, who are in a well-trained, controlled environment might not experience the same. Risk perception has been established that around the age of 12 years, adolescents decrease reliance on concrete thinking and begin to show capacity for abstract thinking, visualization of potential outcomes, and a logical understanding of cause and effect. So they don't think logically, their risk perception is low. That is why they're not able to perceive risk and take more chances. We now switch over to the psychological part, where we take two examples of unstable approaches. Why do people do that? In passenger evacuation. And why do passengers insist on taking their baggage out, belongings out, rather than fleeing the burning aircraft or an aircraft which has met with an accident? So are they not worried about their life, or are they more worried about the belongings? Fear in that context can be shown in an example where you have a pedestrian crossing or a controlled barrier, children are crossing, but there are other places where you do not have the barrier. So some people might take risk of crossing or jaywalking. They have decided that if the traffic is approaching, they'll basically walk or hasten their pace, or last alternative is to run to avoid the traffic. So they cross the road and they do it once. They see a traffic coming in, they hasten their pace, walk, hasten, run, and they escape. They do it a couple of times, and the fear doesn't come in. Where does the fear come in? So they have a plan which is working fine. Fear comes in when your plan fails. One day you're doing the same and you slip in front of the car. Have a near escape. That is when the fear comes in. And next time there is an association. Whenever you're crossing the road, you're extra careful because your amygdala has remembered that response or that emotion of fear which came in. This one, I don't know if this one survived. It's a very close call. Startle, everybody has experienced startle in their lifetime. What basically happens in startle is that startle reflex is the first response to sudden intense stimulus. Triggers an involuntary physiological reflex such as blinking of eyes, increased heart rate, and increased tension of the muscles. The latter are necessary to prepare the body for the fight-flight response. The body is basically shutting down all other areas so that it can concentrate. The startle response is accompanied by an emotional component. For a large part, influences how persons respond to unexpected events. Our initial response is to hold our breaths by locking the diaphragm. We signal the body to go into a state of shock. So diaphragm is locked, so the upper and lower body are basically locked. But diaphragm is the only thing which we can release. Pilots, therefore, are unable to visualize the consequences of an unstable approach till the aircraft is in the state of irretrievable, cannot be retrieved from there. So most unstable approaches do not happen at 1,000 feet. Even if you're unstable at 1,000 feet, most happen at a lower level, which means you're either floating or you have high speed due to tailwinds. So any reason can make the aircraft touch down late. You still do not go around. You touch down. You think you'll stop. But the moment you see the runway ending, the speed is too high. That is when you realize that the plan you had made has failed. Fear comes in. Fear kicks in when your plan, which you thought always worked, you see it failing, so fear kicks in then. Passengers usually collect their belongings and delay evacuations since they do not see the consequences of the aircraft accidents. So if you compare it with a road accident, if you have met with a road accident while sitting on the passenger seat, the next time you would prefer to drive rather than sitting there, because the amygdala has associated the passenger seat with a particular response or emotion. So anxiety develops. So you're more comfortable driving than sitting on the passenger seat. But evacuations are not very common, so passengers haven't associated an emotion with them. So that is why they are more related to the belongings which they want to retrieve. They do not know the consequences of the delay, or if the slide chute gets punctured, what will happen. Passengers have had experiences of road accidents, but not aviation accidents. Pilots suffer from something called as cognitive lockup, which we saw in the previous webinars. They've been uploaded on YouTube, wherein pilots fail to go around because they are unable to switch tasks. The brain kinds of locks the first task, or rather prefers to finish the task in hand rather than switch to a second task which may be for higher priority. So the inability to switch tasks is called cognitive lockup. Another Zygarnik was a psychologist who proposed the Zygarnik effect, wherein he saw that the waiters in a restaurant would remember the order, even multiple orders, till the bill was settled. The moment the bill was settled, it would be erased. So an unfinished task is always troubling, and it keeps occupied in a part of the memory. Therefore, the human brain tends to finish that unfinished task so as to move on. The cognitive lockup basically wants to complete the task in hand rather than switching on to a higher priority task. What are the solutions? We have a couple of solutions with us. Firstly, as I said, you have to know your limitations. If you have good understanding of the functioning of the brain, the role of mind, you basically understand the mechanics, and the mind cannot fool the brain because you know what happened in the past, the reason for that. You don't have any fear of what is going to happen because you know your current limitations and you do not take undue risks. So that helps you in your risk perception and mitigation. So once the moment of startle anxiety passes away, it is necessary that we consciously release the contraction of the diaphragm, which locks the upper and lower body. The diaphragm has three essential functions. One, it provides a platform of support between the top and bottom body. It regulates the shift between the state of alarm and the state of relaxation. It is the one automatic nervous system function which we can consciously control. Other things, if they're frozen, they're frozen. But this one only freezes for the moment that we need to respond to the threat, but we can consciously unlock it. Mindfulness is premised on sustaining attention in the present moment and controlling the way we react to daily thoughts and feelings. So mindfulness is basically being in the present. And breathing, deep breathing or yogic breathing, basically breathing from the diaphragm, that helps you clear the clutter in your mind. Activating the cingulate cortex is the scientific reason or reasoning for mindfulness. So the scientists used to wonder, how would mindfulness or meditation help? So they observed that a particular part of the cortex is activated during mindfulness, meditation, and deep breathing, which ultimately has an effect of releasing and decluttering, providing enough room for you to maneuver and pay attention to the task in hand. So activating the cingulate cortex is a scientific solution which has been found. So to conclude the presentation, I would like to say that the limbic system and its maturity affects the risk appetite, as we have seen the maturity of amygdala. Psychological aspects play an important role to compound the effect. Exposure to the fear can reduce the adverse effect. So cognitive behavior therapy introduces the fear from a low level gradually, so keeps on exposing it to you so that over a period of time you get exposed and get used to it. It's like if a gun goes off suddenly, you will be startled. But an army man would not be startled because he's been used to this. He's been trained, his ears are trained to sudden weapons going off. So that cognitive behavior therapy has already happened in the army person or the military person, but not in a civilian. So if you get used to the same bullets flying around, so over a period of time, you would also get used to it and startle won't happen. It's the same with other cases of startle. Cognitive behavior therapy, CBT, startle effect, mindfulness, and yogic breathing. So these are the very important things. Bottom line of everything is breathing. You have control over your breathing. Then you're in the present, you are mindful, your attention is focused, and fear doesn't set in. And last but not the least, what is courage? Courage is fear holding on a minute longer. So the moment fear comes in, amygdala kicks in, and you respond. So you're basically giving in. But if you hold on a second longer, so your cortex comes in. The cortex tells you what the reality is. And that's what courage is. You hold on, you don't flee. This I conclude the presentation. Thank you for your attention. On the left, we have the blog, Twitter, the YouTube's videos are loaded, the Facebook page, and my email ID. You're most welcome to write to me. Thank you very much for your attention.